I used to think working at the Waffle House was a mundane job. The place had a reputation for serving up delicious breakfast food 24/7, attracting a diverse crowd of night owls and early risers alike. But beneath its shiny facade, behind the sizzle of eggs on the griddle, lurked something dark and sinister. My name is Alex, and is my story. I was hired as a waiter at the Waffle House just a few weeks ago, and everything seemed normal at first. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting an eerie glow on the checkered floors. The hum of conversation filled the air, punctuated by the occasional clink of cutlery against plates. One chilly autumn evening, as the wind whistled through the gaps in the windows, I noticed something odd. A customer, Mr. Wallace, sat alone at the corner booth, engrossed in a newspaper. It wasn't unusual for people to dine alone, but there was something about him that sent shivers down my spine. He had an air of quiet desperation about him, as if he carried the weight of the world on his shoulders. As I approached Mr. Wallace's table, he looked up and our eyes met.
His gaze was piercing, and for a moment, I felt as if he could see straight through me.
But he smiled, a wary, forced smile, and ordered a coffee and a Belgian waffle. I jotted it down and quickly went to the kitchen. The kitchen was where the real chaos happened. The chefs, clad in white aprons, were a blur of motion as they flipped pancakes and scrambled eggs. The sizzle of bacon and the aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled the air. But that night, as I waited for Mr. Wallace's order, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. Finally, the waffle was ready, and I carefully placed it on a plate, topping it with a dollop of whipped cream and a sprinkling of powdered sugar. I poured a steaming cup of coffee and headed back to Mr. Wallace's table. But when I reached the corner booth, he was gone. The newspaper lay open on the table, the pages rustling in the drafty air. Panic surged through me as I looked around the restaurant. There was no sign of Mr. Wallace anywhere. I asked the other customers if they had seen him leave, but no one had noticed. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. I returned to the kitchen, my heart pounding. The chefs exchanged puzzled glances as I recounted what had just happened. They dismissed it as a prank or a mix-up, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The rest of the night passed in a blur. I served customers, refilled coffee cups, and tried to push the strange incident out of my mind. But it lingered, like a shadow in the corners of my thoughts. The next evening, as I arrived for my shift, I couldn't help but feel a sense of dread. The Waffle House was empty, save for a few customers scattered throughout the booths. As I made my rounds, refilling coffee cups and taking orders, I noticed something odd. The same customers who had been here the previous night were here again, in the exact same seats. It was as if time had stood still. Mr. Wallace sat in his corner booth, the newspaper still open in front of him. The other customers were frozen in place, their conversations suspended mid-sentence. Even the sizzle of food in the kitchen had ceased. I approached Mr. Wallace's table, my hands trembling. "Sir, your coffee and waffle," I stammered, placing the plate and cup in front of him. He looked up at me, his eyes filled with a haunting sadness. "Thank you," he said softly, his voice carrying a weight that sent a chill down my spine. I turned to leave, but as I walked away, I couldn't resist stealing a glance back at Mr. Wallace. That's when I saw it. In the reflection of the window, his face was distorted, his features contorted into a grotesque mask of anguish. I blinked, and the reflection returned to normal, but the image was seared into my memory. The night wore on, and the bizarre phenomenon continued. The customers remained frozen, their food untouched. The chefs in the kitchen worked mechanically, as if in a trance. I tried to leave, but the door wouldn't budge. It was as if we were trapped in a never-ending loop, reliving the same moments over and over again. Days turned into weeks, and the nightmare at the Waffle House persisted. Each night, I watched as Mr. Wallace and the other customers repeated their actions, their faces twisted in agony. I tried to communicate with them, to break the cycle, but my words fell on deaf ears. I stopped going home, stopped sleeping. My life became an endless cycle of serving frozen customers and witnessing their torment. The once familiar restaurant had become a nightmarish prison, and I was its unwilling inmate. One night, as I stood by Mr. Wallace's table, a flicker of recognition crossed his face. He looked up at me, his eyes filled with despair. "Help me," he whispered, his voice barely audible. I didn't know how to help him, but I couldn't stand by and do nothing. I reached out to touch his hand, and in that moment, everything changed. The world around us shattered like glass, and we were plunged into darkness. When I opened my eyes, I was no longer in the Waffle House. I was standing in a dimly lit room, surrounded by mirrors that stretched endlessly in every direction. In the reflections, I saw Mr. Wallace and the other customers, their faces twisted in agony. "Where are we?" I asked, my voice trembling. Mr. Wallace turned to me, his eyes filled with sadness. "We're trapped in a never-ending cycle of our own making," he said. "We come here every night, reliving the same moments, the same regrets." I didn't understand, but I knew I had to find a way out. I reached out to touch one of the mirrors, and it shattered like glass, revealing a dark void beyond. Without thinking, I stepped through. I found myself back in the Waffle House, but everything had changed. The customers were gone, and the restaurant was eerily quiet. The lights flickered, casting long, shifting shadows on the walls. The once inviting aroma of food had been replaced by a stale, oppressive odor. As I made my way through the deserted restaurant, I realized that I was alone. The nightmare had ended, but I was the only one left. I couldn't escape the feeling that I had traded places with Mr. Wallace and the others, that I had become a prisoner of the Waffle House. I tried to leave, but the door wouldn't budge. I was trapped, just like they had been. And as the realization sank in, I heard a soft, haunting whisper in the air, as if carried on the wind. "Welcome to the Waffle House," it murmured, "where time stands still and the past never lets go." And there, in that forsaken place, I knew that I would spend eternity, reliving the same moments, haunted by the echoes of the past, forever a part of the chilling legend of the Waffle House.